Hello guys, today we're going to be solving absolute value inequalities. This is going to be very similar to equations, it's just going to be one additional step. So let's go ahead and jump right in. What is an inequality? Just to review, an inequality is something that is less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So those are our symbols that we use in inequalities. We're no longer using equal signs. So just to remind ourselves how to read this, this would read x is less than, and then whatever follows, or x is less than or equal to, if it were the second part. Again, this is just a matter of reviewing how to read it. We read from left to right, just like we do in math, in reading. So here, we're reading with this statement first. So that would be x is greater than or equal to, of course, if it had that little line underneath. So let's go ahead and try the first example. The absolute value of x has to be less than 2. So let's think about this for a minute. I always like to think about the problems before trying to just jump in to solve them. X has to be smaller than 2. What are some of the values that x can be? X could be 1, for example. The absolute value of 1 is 1, so x could be 1. X could be 0.5, because the absolute value of 0.5 is 0.5 and it's less than 2. X could be 0.3, x could be 0.2, anything that's less than 2, really. So notice that we have multiple answers, but it's not only the positives that are less than 2, you could also have negatives. So for example, you could have the absolute value of -1. What's the absolute value of -1? 1. 1 is less than 2, so x could be -1. X could be, let's say, -1.5, because that's supposed to be an absolute value bar. There we go. The absolute value of -1.5 is 1.5. So notice that we're going to have a lot of answers, not only in the positives, but in the negatives. So if we were to think about this answer, here is 0, here is 2, and here is -2. The answer would be any number that falls between 2 and -2. Now, some students get confused and it doesn't quite make sense. That's okay. So there's this strategy that I like to use. Keep your original statement, x is less than 2. And then remember that we always changed it to get rid of the absolute value bars. We always had the positive one, and then we always had the negative one. So for the negative one, x is something, I'm going to leave that blank for a minute, -2. Because remember, we have to account for the negative. Here, x has to be strictly smaller than 2, but here, x has to be strictly bigger than -2. So you flip the sign. It kind of goes back to math 1 when we said, if you divide by a negative in an inequality, flip the sign. So if you're breaking this into a positive and a negative, so you have a positive answer, right, where it stays the same, and then you have a negative, do not forget to flip the sign when you make it negative, to flip the sign. So in reality, you're saying x has to be smaller than 2. Notice that it's not equal to 2. So I'm going to draw an open circle here because I'm graphing it on a line. It has to be smaller than 2. So any number smaller than 2 is this way. So I'm drawing my line this way. And then it has to be a number that is greater than -2. Again, it's not equal to 2, so I'm going to draw my open circle like this. And so my answers are any numbers that fall between -2 and 2. And if I were to write that connected in one compound statement, because it is together, I would start with -2 is less than x, which has to be less than 2. Notice that I put these 2 from here connected because the absolute value of x is less than 2. All right, let's go ahead and try another one. Be very careful with the signs because that's where my students get confused. X, the absolute value of x has to be greater than or equal to 3. So any number bigger than 3. So I'm going to go to my number line right here. Any number that is greater than or equal to 3. So I know that it's going to be equal to 3, so I can circle that, fill the circle in. And it has to be bigger, so it's any number bigger this way. Like this. Now, again, we account for the positives. There's my positive. Now let's account for the negatives. X, negative 3. We made that 3 a negative to account for the negatives, so we got to flip the sign. Notice that I flipped the sign. So that says x is less than negative 3. So let me put the numbers on the number line. It says x is less than 3. So my other part of the equation, it can equal negative 3. And it has to be less than. So less than negative 3 would be to the left, remember, because we're in the negatives. So this one actually goes into different directions. And because it goes into different directions, you cannot write it together as a compound statement like we did in the other one. So for example, let me try. If I put negative 3 first, notice that the negative 3 is bigger up here, so I have to keep the sign open towards that way. And then notice that this one says x is bigger, so I have to keep the sign this way. You cannot write it together like that because that does not make sense. Negative 3 is not greater than positive 3. So therefore, because it's going in two different directions, you have to write this separate. Again, it's important that you note that you have to write it separate. X is smaller than negative 3, or x is greater than 3. You could write it that way. Remember, if you put the numbers first, you have to flip the sign if the x comes second. So that's how that answer would look like. Let's go ahead and try one quickly. Like x is, the absolute value of x is less than or equal to 8. Let's do this one a little bit faster than the ones we just did. Account for the positives. There's the positives. And then account for the negatives. X, negative 8. We made it negative, so we got to flip the sign. And now graph it to see if you can write it together. So I'm going to graph it. Here's 0. Here's negative 8. Here's positive 8. This is a closed circle because it is equal to. So I'm going to do closed circle on both ends. And let's see if this one goes together or goes outward. X is smaller than 8. X is less than or equal to 8. That's what the first statement says. So I go this way. X is greater than or equal to negative 8. So I go this way. This one is connected. So therefore, I can write the answer together. And I start with the smallest number first, always. It's important to start with the smallest number first and keep the order. X is greater than negative 8. And then x is smaller than 8, like that. So we write it like that. Let's go ahead and try one more. X is, the absolute value of x is greater than 10. So if I were to try to do this one quickly, I would say x is greater than 10. That's my positive one. And I'm going to do my negative one. X is less than negative 10. Again, I flipped my sign because I made that 10 negative, and we can't forget to do that. Now let me graph it to see if I can write it together. So here's 0, negative 10, positive 10. This is an open circle because it is greater than open circles. So x is greater than 10. Any number bigger than 10 is to the right. And any number less than negative 10 is to the left. This statement cannot be written separately because cannot be written together because it is separated. So your answer would just be those two together, and you could write the word or in between, like this. That would be your answer. All right, that's it for this video.